Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host, husband, and partner in crime.
Keep going. I'm kidding. What's up? How are you?
I am feeling good today, man. I feel like I've got some energy. You know, it's also just like that phase of my cycle. I have the most energy. I'm feeling really good. Got in a great workout this morning. Like I'm feeling good.
You're looking good too.
Yeah, he's trying to get some brownie points in, but
in front of the people.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right in, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So today, thing that I was seeing on Instagram recently. I feel like I pull a lot of ideas of things that I want to talk about from social media because I'll see people sharing like extreme ideas, and I'm like, oh, got to give my take on this one. So the latest of what I've been seeing shared on Instagram is this claim that anyone who tracks their calories or their macros has a bad relationship with food.
Ooh, break that down for us.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to give our take on this a little bit, because obviously having worked with hundreds of women who many of them come to us with a poor relationship with food, and most of them, if not just, or I'd say really just many of them, of course we do use different methods, but many of them we do end up having them track their food. If not, all of them start off with a little bit of tracking so we can get some awareness around that. And so having that experience of both having worked with so many women with poor relationships with food coming to us and using methodology such as tracking calories and tracking macros, I want to give my hot take on that statement of, does tracking calories, does tracking macros create a negative relationship with food? And my take on it is no, it does absolutely not.
I don't know. I like to be funny sometimes.
You're so funny. But it's in terms of, if we're talking about tracking our food, I like to think of it as tracking. I know we've used this analogy before on the podcast, but tracking is a lot like budgeting. Mm-hmm. So if we're saying tracking your calories, tracking your macros creates a poor relationship with food, that'd be like saying budgeting your finances, tracking your money creates a negative relationship with money.
Yeah. It's like looking at your bank account, looking at your credit card statement, that creates a bad relationship with money, right?
Yeah. And I think anybody, like any just normal human being, could hear that and be like, okay, yeah, no, that logically that does not make sense. If somebody is tracking their money, if they are, operating off of a budget, one would assume that they actually have probably a pretty positive relationship with money. They probably have a pretty healthy relationship with money. They're probably pretty just intelligent when it comes to their finances as a whole, compared to somebody who maybe is not doing those things. So why would it really be any different when we're talking about tracking our nutrition? Because at the end of the day, tracking macros, tracking calories, it is just a methodology. It is a tool. It is a tool for building awareness. It is a tool for monitoring and measuring our nutrition in one way. So go ahead.
I was going to say, as I'm kind of going through this and gathering my own thoughts, my own experience, just I track food right now, and I'm tracking it. I work with a coach, and I'm tracking it because I'm trying to just achieve some more health and fitness goals for myself. But I think the problem is it's not necessarily tracking, it's the person's methodology or perspective around what tracking does or how to use it. And I think that's the biggest problem. And I'm pretty sure that's kind of where you're going with things. But going back to like the finance or the budgeting example or analogy, it's not necessarily that, the person has or will create a bad relationship with food. I just don't think that people properly know how to use it, which ultimately, because it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So because you don't know how to use this tool, you think that restricting and eating less, moving more is the answer. Therefore, that's what you use the tool for. And of course, that does create a bad relationship with food. But ultimately, that's not the way to use the tool. So I think it's a lack of awareness or a lack of understanding of how to properly track your calories or your macros or whatever it is that you're using it for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, really kind of skipping to my conclusions here on this episode. And you know what, I do want to kind of table that conversation here for a minute. Let's talk about some reasons why somebody might track their calories or track their macros in a healthy way, and how, these are perfectly healthy reasons why somebody might use that tool of tracking.
Well, let's use like yourself, for example. Like, why do you still track calories now?
Yeah, so that's something that I kind of want to talk about as well, of like, for probably the last 3 months or so, like I would say during the holiday season, kind of starting from like our honeymoon through the holiday season. We had a lot of travels.
Oh, Mexico was great.
Yeah, I did take a break from tracking for probably like a solid 3, maybe even 4 month period. I really just was not in tracking apps at all, was 100% just using my intuitive eating skills during that time to monitor my nutrition. Now, currently, it's, we're in February now, and I am at this point in time moving into some new goals for 2024. And so for me, that looks like now I want to build my calories up higher and work on building more muscle and adding more endurance and really getting some athleticism back this year. I have some performance goals in place, and I want to kind of see and feel my body change and evolve in that way of, pushing my performance now. So with that, having a goal in place, I need to have a structured way of reaching that goal. Yeah. I can't just set a goal and say, I want to achieve this thing, whether that goal is weight loss or toning up or, getting faster in runs or stronger in lifts, like whatever the goal is. We can't just say, that's my goal, and then I just hope I magically end up there and reach the goal. We have to have a system to reach that goal. And all of us, I believe, anybody who listens to this podcast probably is aware of the fact that your nutrition is a very important variable when it comes to those types of goals. So how do we add that type of structure and process to our nutrition? One way of doing that, and one very, very effective way of doing that, is through tracking calories or tracking macros. So for that reason, I have added back in tracking. Just really last week was my first week back of fully tracking everything, a full 7 days, everything tracked. And I'm not gonna lie, like the first, we haven't tracked for a period of time, and I've, spent cumulatively many years tracking on and off.
I'm friends with Vanessa on MyFitnessPal, and sometimes I'll get a message that'll be like, Vanessa has tracked consecutively. This was a little bit ago, but it's like, she's tracked consecutively for like a year. Encourage her to keep going or something like that.
Yeah, like I would, get those kinds of things because I just was always in MyFitnessPal, whether I'm like checking client food logs or of course tracking my own food. Like I have a lot of experience with tracking calories and tracking macros. Yet despite that experience, anytime I come back from a break from tracking macros, no matter how long it is, when I go to get back into it, I'm like, oh man, this feels like moving through mud.
It's a learning curve again.
It's not even so much like the learning. It's more of just like this feels like work. Yeah. Like it felt so easy to not think about numbers and not to have to worry about like taking the time to log my food. And I got used to that. And now I'm like, oh man, I need to track what I'm eating. Like that just sounds so hard. Like I create that story in my head initially. In that first day, the first, probably like 1 to 2 days, it's kind of like, man, this is going to be rough. I don't want to do this. Like even me, with all my experience, with all my beliefs around how tracking is beneficial, I still carry those thoughts. However, I know now that that's always just going to be that initial, like getting that just movement going. Like if you're like pushing a bowling ball down a hill, it's going to be really heavy to first get it moving. But once you get that momentum going, now it's rolling, now it's moving, now you can't stop it. So I just have to push that bowling ball forward, get the momentum going. And so the way that I did that last week was I actually sat down then that Sunday and I planned out my whole week of eating. I kind of determined essentially like a meal plan per se of what I was going to eat. And I pre-tracked it Monday through Friday the whole week. And I even did most of Saturday. With that, I had a plan to follow. So then from there, it wasn't so much of like, oh man, I have to like throughout the whole day, remember to track my food and like just force myself.
Things. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of the stuff that we stress over of like, I just don't have time for this. I don't have the mental energy for this. I don't want to think about it. It's like that process is already done. At this point, I already have the win in place because I took that realistically like 30 minutes total, probably on Sunday doing that. I already got that in place. Now, each day afterwards, all I had to do was actually just move, add, change things essentially as I went. Because obviously, when I have my whole week of meals planned out, Monday, pretty much stuck to it to a T. Tuesday, it was like, you know what? I think I want a little bit something else. Maybe I'm just going to like switch out this side with my breakfast. Or maybe I'm going to have like a little bit different snack here. And it's more of just now I'm just moving things, shifting things around, which is super easy and doesn't take much thought at all or time, essentially.
So here's kind of my take on the reason why I enjoy it. And I'm at a point right now where I want to continue to use this as a tool, is because similar to you, like you said, we had Mexico, we were in Arizona, we were skiing. I mean, we've had a lot of trouble and just a lot of stuff going on that is just not very conducive to helping you, really stay on target, stay on track when it comes to this stuff. My biggest thing, and the reason why I love just tracking my intake for now, is because it takes away a lot of the I feel. So right now I can be at a point where I feel like I'm making progress. I feel like I'm not. I feel like I'm eating enough. I feel like I'm not. So it gives me just data-driven or data-based evidence that I am eating enough or I'm not eating enough, so that if for some XYZ reason I'm not making progress to my goals, we can tweak a couple of things, whether it's training, diet variation, whatever that is. But for me, it just takes my emotional element out of things. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like I'm doing this, or yeah, I think I am, or I'm not. And it's just very, black or white. So it's like, okay, at least I know that part of the equation is taken care of, which the nutrition is 80-90% of the work. So now it's either, am I getting enough movement? Am I not? Am I, hydration? Like, again, you start to just check and go off the list, but ultimately it just gives me peace of mind that my nutrition is in a good place to ensure that I am, like you said, making progress. Because we've shared this analogy, but like a plane can take off from New York to San Francisco, a couple degrees off, it ends up in Texas, not San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of that. It's making sure that I'm on track, I'm on the right path to ensure that 3, 6, 9 months down the road, I am actually hitting my target. So that's why I love it right now. Do I want to do it forever? Absolutely not. But it works for what I'm doing now.
Exactly. So that's all to say, like, it is a tool. And one of the, common reasons why people will utilize this tool in a healthy way, perfectly healthy reason here, is to add more accuracy through their nutrition. And so if you have a goal in place, that nutrition is going to be a variable in whether or not you reach that goal. You're going to want to have that variable be as accurate as possible. And if we are using, maybe other methodologies like using a meal plan, that might give you some, that gives you a good amount of accuracy if you are following the meal plan to a T. Most people don't follow meal plans to a T. Like I even said myself, I created my own meal plan for the week. I followed it on Monday. I didn't follow it the rest of the week. I changed it up because I hate to say it, but unless I need to for a specific, health outcome, occasionally we'll follow more strict meal plans. But otherwise, I'm like, I don't like to eat this exact same thing day after day. But if I want to have that type of variability, I want to give myself a lot of autonomy in my nutrition, I need to make sure that I'm still dialing in the accuracy of that nutrition via the numbers, via looking at the number of proteins, carbs, fats, my fiber, my total calories, looking at those numbers to be able to say, am I doing the things I need to do in order to reach the goal I have in place for myself?
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about, ensuring that we're eating enough calories, making sure that we're eating the right type of things, giving structure to the day. Can you talk a little bit about this point here of actually giving somebody flexibility? Because I think to a point it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because people are like, what do you mean I'm going to have more flexibility, or I'm going to have more freedom when I'm tracking everything? Like, it sounds very different. Can you break that down a little bit more?
Yeah. So in terms of having that type of structure, because at the end of the day, if you're tracking things, now you're building awareness around how much you are eating, how many calories, how many proteins, how many carbs, how many fats, like you're getting that awareness. So if you have goals in place for those numbers, then you can say, okay, just like if I have a budget of, I can spend $100 a week. Like if that's my allowance, I have $100 a week to spend on anything I want. Then if, Monday comes around, I can say, okay, I want to spend this much on this day on this thing. Tuesday, I want to spend this much on this thing. But but I also know that Saturday and Sunday, I want to spend a little bit more. Then I can allocate more of that budget to those days. It's the same thing with our macros and our calories. Overall, typically for optimal results, we want to have things a little bit more either even across the board of eating the same amount of calories day after day, or having structure around having higher days and lower days. Typically that might fall around our workouts. These are a little bit more higher level strategies. But that being said, at the end of the day, you can give yourself flexibility by saying, okay, on average, I'm going to eat this many calories per day.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have like big swings. We don't want to have like, oh, Monday through Friday, I'm like restricting myself as low as possible. And then Friday and Saturday, I'm like, woo, going on a bender with all my calories. That's not going to help you. That's going to create a lot of inflammation. It's not going to be effective for your metabolism. Like we don't want to go to that extreme. However, we can say, okay, maybe I'm going to have a little bit less calories on Friday so that I can have a little bit more on Saturday, because I know I have a big event that night that I know I'm going to want to spend a little bit more of my calories on that.
And to just give another perspective, so that flexibility point, I literally was just on a call with somebody yesterday afternoon, and this came up, and she was like, well, she's like, I want to know what to do in social settings. So I was like, okay, well, what have you tried? She's like, well, every time I go to count my calories, I first of all eat 1,200 calories, which she understood that it just wasn't enough food. But then she goes, yeah, so when I'm on plan or I'm tracking or I'm doing something, I don't eat out socially, period. And because I just don't think that it's possible. Mm-hmm. So I kind of talked a little bit about that. And I think the question that I think is so important to bring up is, do you think it's possible for you to never eat out again, ever again in your life? And she kind of sat there for a second. She's like, well, no, I guess it's not. I was like, exactly. So that's why we have to learn how to use this tool to actually give you flexibility instead of the way we've been using it to restrict along the way, right? But it's that point of awareness creates a little bit of that flexibility, so you know what you can, what you cannot, indulge in or whatnot, to ultimately make sure that you are staying on track with your plan. And I think it's such a big point that nobody really talks about, and I love it, but I'm glad that you were kind of able to break that down.
Yeah, it's in like having awareness, because again, tracking is just building awareness around the numbers. Having awareness gives us a lot of relief, which we don't often talk about. We these types of people who are making claims about tracking being something that creates a negative relationship with food. Often they're talking about it being so restrictive, but the reality is, I would not consider it It can be restrictive if you make it that way, if you're not going about it the correct way, but it does not absolutely have to be restrictive. And for our clients, it is not restrictive, because what we're doing is we're giving you freedom through education and through awareness of what you're eating, so that if you want to have more treats, you understand how to fit them into your goals. And that's a big point, again, of why somebody may choose to track their calories or track their macros for a healthy reason. May be that they simply want to learn more about their nutrition. They want to better understand what foods are comprised of. They want to be able to have the knowledge to be able to look at a restaurant meal and be able to say, oh, okay, so it looks like there's about this much protein. Okay, I see my carb source right there, and I'm going to estimate that there's about that much carbs, and I can see the fats here. And to have that kind of knowledge, gosh, it gives you so much freedom and power to be able to make good decisions that are going to help get you to where you want to be.
And I think it gives you freedom around food too, because you're constantly beating yourself up. You're like, God, I'm such an idiot. I'm terrible at this. I just had that piece of French toast or whatever. When in reality, you really can have the piece of French toast and still make progress towards your goal. So it just gives you that like aha moment to be like, oh, I can have this and I can have the body that I want. It's a win-win situation kind of thing.
I mean, you and I this morning both had a little bit of pancakes, some eggs, some bacon, and some sausage.
They were so good.
And it's an average Tuesday. Like, that's just what our breakfast looked like this today, because that's what we wanted. We had, real maple syrup on our pancakes. We had, actual pancakes. Like, we can have these foods when we want them because we know how to fit them into our goals. And we know how to balance out the foods that maybe are, not as nutrient dense, not as fiber rich, not as, healing for the body in terms of providing like a lot of nutritional benefit. We know how to balance them out because we've built awareness through tracking time after time.
And think about this, and I'm not going to go down a big rabbit hole, but just for perspective, right? So Random Tuesday, we had pancakes, bacon, sausage, eggs. So if you are allowed to have that during the week, do you think you're going to feel restricted, or do you think you're going to feel more of an urge to like indulge when you're out and about because you can't have that stuff? So if you can incorporate those meals into your everyday life, when you go to sit down at brunch, when you go to eat out to eat with your friends, you're going to be like, you know what? Maybe I feel like having it, maybe I don't, but because I can have it every single day, right? So you don't feel so inclined to be like, I need to eat this, right now, and
exactly.
potentially get you down to a point where you are developing a bad relationship with food.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's consider another point here of why somebody may choose to track for a healthy reason. This is one that, like, for me personally, this is probably what really got me into tracking back in the day, and that was that I was eating very quote unquote clean, but not seeing the progress I wanted to see. So I had really fallen into the camps of these people who would preach of like, oh, all you have to do is just eat cleaner.
What does that even mean, first of all?
Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions of what clean could potentially mean, but essentially it's like, people looking at just whole foods, no added ingredients, nothing processed, like just really all you're eating is, vegetables, fruits, meats, nuts and seeds, like very, very basic foods, and that's it, nothing else. That's clean, quote unquote. So I was under this impression that, if I'm eating that way, I'm only eating those foods, then my body is naturally going to be able to decide when I've had enough calories, when I am like, my body's just going to know, and it's going to communicate that to me because I'm eating clean. Now, for some people, that may work. Like I do know of some people that they've always been that way their whole life. All they do is focus on eating overall pretty clean, and that works for them, and that's great for them. But I would say they are the very rare few. However, unfortunately, those people are often very loud on social media and can be very influential to a lot of people who simply just want to feel better in their bodies, want to lose weight, want to look better, and they think, if I do that too, that's going to work for me.
Yeah.
The reality is, so many of those people get to a point where they're like, I'm not making any progress. I'm not seeing the weight loss I want to see. I'm not seeing, I'm not toning up. I'm not seeing the progress from this. And the reasoning for that is because just eating clean is not going to give us the information we need about how much we're consuming. And so, for example, if we have a specific goal around, we can use me, for example. So like right now, like I mentioned, my goal is now I want to add muscle. I want to build lean toned muscle, and I want to get stronger. Through that, I know that in order to reach that goal, I need more protein. So what I've done in working with my coach, of course, like even though I have all the knowledge, I still work with the coach through all these processes so I can have that external opinion and get out of my own head. We've begun raising my protein up higher than it was previously because I know that I need that extra protein to help my body through that process of breaking down muscle fibers and building them back up bigger and stronger, which is what we're doing when we're strength training. Same thing for somebody who is trying to lose body fat. They may be eating clean, but they may accidentally way overconsume on fats because a lot of like these clean, healthy foods are very high in fat. Now, that's not to say that's a bad thing, but if your goal is weight loss, knowing that fats is a very calorie dense macronutrient, there are 9 calories per gram of fat, which is more than double of our carbs and our proteins, then if we are not monitoring the amount of fats we're eating total, we're probably going to overconsume calories, which means we're probably going to end up actually gaining weight, if anything else. So we can see how just eating clean is not really good advice for people. That's really like telling someone, hey, you want to lose weight? Just go to the gym and exercise. Like, yeah, that's a good place to start. Like, they're not wrong by saying go to the gym and exercise, but that doesn't give you a whole lot of information. It's not telling you, okay, what exercises? How many reps should I do? How long should I stay at the gym? Like, it's not giving you a lot of guidance. It's just this like blanket statement, which may or may not work for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask Ness, maybe break this down a little bit, because I think one of the biggest knocks on tracking food, or one of the biggest things that people complain about it is, Vanessa, like, I don't want to be tied to MyFitnessPal. I don't want to be tied to a scale for the rest of your life. Like, what would you say to those types of people?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of like we mentioned before, we are through the process of tracking, we are acquiring more knowledge. We're learning about our food. So kind of circling back to what we were saying earlier, you and I can go through periods of time where we're not tracking, and then we can go back to tracking. The reason we can go through those periods of not tracking and not just completely like fall off and, just gain a bunch of weight or lose all of our muscle or just like feel really unhealthy and feel terrible is because we have so much awareness and knowledge through tracking of what our bodies need, how many calories, how much protein, how much fat, how much carbs, but not just the numbers, what that actually looks and feels like. So we can eyeball it. We can be able to say, okay, I can go throughout my day and I can build a balanced plate at each meal and guesstimate in my head, like with, very little time actually consciously thinking about this. I can just visually be like, that's about how much I need to eat, and I can feel it and I know what that feels like. we don't just magically get there. Unfortunately, nobody can just...
You start to make more educated choices.
Yeah, but it's not like intuition to the sense of like, oh, I just one day was like, oh, I am now in tune with what my body needs. I now know what's, the amount of food looks like on a plate for my body. It takes time and it takes processes in order to go from building awareness of, okay, what does it actually look like to have that many calories, and now to not track it at all and be able to say, oh, I can still actually visualize that for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any skill. You're going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have days that you're like, I don't know if this worked. I don't know if I did. But it's just putting yourself in that situation where you gain the awareness, you go try the skill. If it works, great, fantastic. Keep developing it. If not, you can go back and you have a little bit of that structure along the way. Yeah, I think that's super important to point out.
Yeah, it's like learning any new skill. If you're learning to drive a car, you are 15 years old, you just got your permit, you're learning to drive a car, it's going to take so much conscious effort. It's probably going to feel really scary. It's probably going to feel really hard. Like, you're going to probably get in your head over it. Some people get so in their heads over it that they might be like, you know what? I don't need to drive, and they don't get their license until they absolutely have to.
Who does that remind you of?
That was not me. That was not me. I got my license right at 16.
That's not what I meant. It's more so when Vanessa and I have to go anywhere, she's like, here, babe, like, you can drive, right? And I'm like, you need to drive sometime. You're going to forget that skill.
It's just because you're the man and you make me feel so safe in the car.
Oh, man.
I feel so safe when I'm riding as a passenger in your car.
Sure.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, it's okay. You gain that skill, you get better at it. And then eventually over time, you don't have to think through every step. You're not like, okay, this is how I now put the car in drive. Okay, let me check my mirrors. Okay, now, I'm going this way. I got to turn my signal on. Like, you don't think through every step. It's all happening very unconsciously. And that's what starts to happen with monitoring our nutrition. We don't have to consciously think, okay, let me weigh this out. All right, let me see how much that was in MyFitnessPal. Oh, okay, that's 20 grams of carbs. Okay, so now I need to do this. And like, it might feel so tedious when you're first learning that. Over the course of time, you acquire the knowledge, and now it's just like subconscious.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, you don't have to track forever. You definitely do not have to track for the rest of your life. Tracking is a tool, and it will build awareness, and it can be a really good thing for people. And we see that time after time with our clients, how helpful, how productive, how beneficial it can be for them and their goals. So, I mean, honestly, like, the funny thing is, so many women, when they come to us and they're like a little bit reserved about the idea of tracking, they're like, I don't know, like, I've tried that before, it felt pretty restrictive, or I've heard that that's really restrictive, or I don't like tracking, it's not good for me. If I'm like, hey, just trust us here, let us walk you through our process of teaching you how to track, work with our coaches here, and let us really kind of work with you on this, and let's see how it feels. And if it still feels that way, then we can adjust, then we can find other methodologies that will work better for you. But let's start here. Let's try this.
And the cool thing, go ahead.
And I would say majority of the time, those women end up coming back afterwards and they're like, my relationship with food is actually better than it's ever been now.
Yeah.
I feel so much freer with food. I am enjoying food now for like the first time in my life. And that is the power of tracking when you do it correctly and you use this tool effectively.
Yeah, I want to highlight that point of when you do it correctly, because I think what people do too is, it's a random person that has never had any experience or any guidance when it comes to this stuff. And now all of a sudden they're tracking every single little thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. There's a lot of methodology where you can start tracking certain things here and there just to get you a little bit of awareness. And that's what makes the process so sustainable, because you're not throwing, the whole kitchen drawer at thing. Or is that a thing? Kitchen drawer?
Sink.
Kitchen sink. But that's my point is, when you are working with somebody that has experience or has more knowledge than you on this stuff, they can break stuff down to where it doesn't seem as overwhelming. And next thing you know, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm an expert. Like, how did I get here? It's like, well, it's because you're working with people that have done this with hundreds of women or hundreds of times before,
Yep. So now let's kind of circle back to what we were talking about there at the very beginning, when you kind of gave a little bit of a spoiler alert there. Why is it that some of these people are making these claims that tracking creates a poor relationship with food? Well, the reality is it's because of what these people are making the numbers mean. So tracking in and of itself does not guarantee you a positive relationship with food and does not guarantee you a negative relationship with food. It's all about your process of how you learn to think about tracking, how you learn to think about food through that process.
That's such a good point. It's your own perception of how you go about things.
Exactly. Wow. It's what you make the numbers mean. So if you have a target, let's say that you are trying to learn to track calories on your own, you just use this like online TDEE calculator and it gave you a really low calorie mark. You don't know that. You're just like, oh, this is what it told me to eat, but you're eating probably way too low calories for what you should be eating. And now you're going through your day and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm already out of calories. And like, or I planned out my day, but now my friend, just surprised me with a donut at work and I really want this donut, but like it's going to put me a few hundred calories over my target. Now you're thinking, oh, this donut put me over my calories. That means I'm bad. I'm having this thought of like, I messed up. I failed. I'm over my calories. And going over my calories equals bad, equals wrong. Guess what? That's probably going to create an association of you thinking that you can't have donuts when you're tracking your calories. And of course, if I tell you, yeah, when you track, you can't have donuts or like whatever favorite food is.
Worst thing you can say to me, I'm like, I want more of those.
Yeah, you're going to then create that thought pattern of this is restrictive. Like any of us would. We all would do that. So now we have this fear of eating these foods. We have this fear of tracking. We have this like idea that tracking is restrictive. But the reality is tracking is not restrictive. It all started with the fact that you were maybe eating the wrong amount of calories for your body. That's number one. And then what you made it mean to go over your calories, the thoughts that you produced about that, when inherently maybe you actually, even though like you went maybe 300 calories over, maybe actually that 300 calorie mark over is actually what you should be eating because maybe you're tracking on too low of a calorie mark. So you may not have done anything wrong at all. You might actually be in a better spot at that point, but you feel wrong for it. You feel guilty. You feel bad. And of course that guilt is going to create that negative association.
And it's going to force you not to want to track it. It's going to force you to steer away from it.
Exactly. But I mean, you should be allowed to have donuts and enjoy your life, enjoy your favorite foods, have pancakes and bacon in the morning like we do sometimes. Like you should be able to have the things that you love and find ways to fit that into your goals. And that's what tracking can teach you. So if you are ready to learn to track macros the right way, we can teach you that for free. Join our free Facebook group. It's called Women's Metabolism Secrets, and it is linked below in the show notes. You can find it there. But if you go into that group, you will find our macro tracking crash course where we teach you from start to end how to track your macros, how to calculate them, what you should be eating. We really give you the foundational rundown there. Of course, there's a lot more nuances to things beyond, just kind of going through a course. So there may be more things that need to be adjusted, and that's what we're here for. So shoot me a message, let me know where you need help. I'm always happy to offer guidance wherever I can.
I will say the course is a 6-part series. So when you're in the group, of course, we'll tag you in all 6 parts, but just make sure that you're seeing parts 1 through 6 so that you can get the full course, the full information to help you, like Vanessa said, make sure that you are doing this the right way.
Yeah, if you shoot me a message, we'll tag you in those ones specifically, or you can go in there, find them yourself, and then just shoot me a message when you need help. But
absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening, you guys. This was hopefully a really helpful episode for you, and we'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, you guys.